Coniston Massacre occurred in 1928 and was the last massacre of Aboriginals. Before we can look at the massacre itself, we must take a look at the outcomes of the massacre and the relationships between Aboriginals and white Australians before the Coniston Massacre. Even before the Coniston Massacre, there was a rising tension between white Australians and the Aboriginal tribes. One of the leading factors to this was the hatred displayed towards white Australians by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of Australia due to the Stolen Generation, which happened 6 years beforehand. There were also small skirmishes which prolonged the hatred between white Australians and Aboriginals. These smaller massacres were mainly before the 1920s, and the most infamous being the Myall Creek Massacre. The 1920s saw more violence between the two groups. The Coniston Massacre in 1926 was the last recorded massacre of Aboriginal people by white Australians. None of the white Australians involved in the killing and injuring of Native Australians were ever brought to justice. There have been many massacres in Australia ever since the Europeans settled in Australia after the 1920s, and there was more violence in Western Australia and the Northern Territory. The massacre itself. It was 1928, in the middle of the drought. The Aboriginals were struggling to find food and water. Tensions were rising between Aboriginals and whites in the Northern Territory. A dingo trapper, Frederick Brooks, was working for the Coniston cattle station and stumbled upon the Warlpiri people and offered food for the leader Bullfrog's wife to wash his clothes. Bullfrog stumbled across them engaging in sexual intercourse and killed Brooks instantly. They buried him in a rabbit hole after dismembering him. The two boys accompanying Brooks were told to go back to the farm and say that he died of natural causes. A week after the death, several policemen were sent to investigate. A World War I veteran named William Murray started the killing. He started by chasing 3 Aboriginal boys and tying their legs together and ordering them to lead them to their tribe, the Warlpiri. The boys solved this problem by beating their feet with rocks until they had broken most bones. Murray still made them walk for the next day, and every Aboriginal Murray saw, he killed or captured. Murray then found tracks and came across the Warlpiri tribe. He ordered them to drop their weapons, but they did not understand English. The women and the children ran while the men stayed to defend. The official report says that up to 40 Aboriginals died, and every one of them was a murderer of Brooks. The Aboriginals claim that over 170 people of 3 tribes have been killed during that period. There is no solid evidence, as none of this was really recorded and was very biased due to the fact that the only recordings were by white Australians. After the massacre. After the massacre, Murray was quietly fired from the police department and left Coniston, and died of old age, but never being charged. The Coniston Massacre was the last white-black people massacre, ending a chapter of racial differences in Australia. But also, so much negativity came out of the Australian milestone, some good was created as well. The survivor of the massacre, Billy Stockman, grew up to be a very well-known Aboriginal painter, growing up to be known as a successful Dreamtime dot painter and a woodcarver, in depicting the events of the Coniston Massacre.